We'll be getting started in 5 minutes. Good evening. We're getting started in 2 minutes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Kumsie, and I am a member of Universal Co-Masonry, which is for Freemasonry for men and women. The purpose of the Masonic Seminar Series is to provide foundational information about Freemasonry in general and about Universal Co-Masonry in particular. So each month we present a different topic that we feel will help better inform individuals who are possibly thinking about becoming a Mason or are just merely interested in the idea of Masonry. So each month is a standalone, even if like this time we're doing a series of different topics that are related to each other. I have made the presentations so that they do not require previous experience with us. So hopefully if this is your first time, first off, welcome, and thank you for spending your evening or morning if you're coming in from the Philippines or from wherever you're coming in around the world. It's wonderful to have you with us. And second, so that you can have a better understanding no matter what time you join us throughout the year. A little bit about Masonic Seminar Series. If you are familiar, we have another group called the Masonic Philosophical Society, which is a very discussion-based group. If you have not checked it out, I highly recommend it. And we have online as well as in-person centers around the country and the globe. And that one, as I said, is very much discussion-based. Masonic Seminar Series, after a lot of years of doing it, we found that people tend to enjoy more of a lecture style approach as you're trying to just get a lot of information in, especially some people come to us not knowing very much at all of anything. And some of you come with a lot of information, albeit maybe about our Mailcraft Brothers or Eastern Star or some other type of group. So we have a wide range, and we find that the lecture approach is the best one. So lucky you get the next hour and a half of listening to me talk. There are some moments where I will stop for questions or comments. I do ask that you stay on topic so that way we don't digress or go somewhere that we weren't intending, as some people are joining us just for the topic that we're presenting tonight, which is on Neoplatonism. And with that being said, like I said, I'll stop periodically throughout. Sometimes once or twice, sometimes a little bit more. It just depends on the presentation. When I do stop, please make sure if you have questions or comments to use the virtual hand option, as I can't see everyone raise their hand. If you have a question on how to do that on our Zoom platform, Brother Benjamin Hartle will assist you with that. You can just message him and he'll help you. Brother Patrick Alessandra is also in the office, and he will take care of those who are coming in on Facebook, Twitter, or X, I should say, and YouTube. So if you have questions, you can always post those, and Brother Patrick will ask on your behalf. So trying to reach out to as many people that want to listen to us and get their questions heard. The one thing I do want to say before we delve into tonight's topic is that what you see is the understanding of what I have come to learn over the last 20 years of being a Mason. This is my opinion and my research. And so although Freemasonry has many objective underpinnings, there's a lot of place for interpretation and growth of knowledge. So I've not presented this particular topic, Neoplatonism, before in the last 6 years or 7 years that we've been doing it. But if I were to present it next year, you might get a totally different presentation because I'm constantly trying to keep up on my understanding. And that's probably one of the most important things outside of understanding what Freemasonry is, which is its ritual, is that Freemasonry is always going and is always growing. And you can't just let it sit there and be nothing, because that's all it will be. If you just put no energy into it, you will always sit with the same understanding. And Masonry isn't meant to just be stagnant. So my presentations are my personal opinion. They are not the official opinions of Universal Co-Masonry. So please keep that in mind. You'll hear different opinions going on around the room if Brother Benjamin or Brother Patrick jump in, as well as other Masons that are here. And speaking of which, before we get into the lecture tonight, if you are a Mason coming from another obedience, welcome. We ask you to be very cautious about what you talk about, because in Universal Co-Masonry, we're very conservative on what we talk about in regards to ritual. We do not release that information or discuss it in detail. The reason being is Masonry it's all about experience. You have to experience, and no matter how many books you read, you'll never fully get the experience unless you go through it. And so we keep that information very private. And if for those who become a Mason, you'll understand why when you go through that whole ceremony. All right. I think that's enough of an opening. Let's get started. To give a couple more prefaces to this, and I'm looking off screen because my computer's here, so I don't think I'm being sidetracked. So what we're doing, you guys can see my screen okay? So what we're doing is we're doing an exploration of the Western esoteric tradition. And what that means is that we're looking at the different traditions that came out around the Hellenistic period, a little bit before, such as Gnosticism we've looked at, Hermeticism. Tonight we're looking at Neoplatonism. Next month we're going to look at astrology, and I'll talk about that, and I'll repeat myself next month on what I'm about to say about astrology, but 1 minute. We'll look at alchemy, we'll look at theurgy and ritualistic magic, all because Freemasonry is in its growth through time immemorial, which means we don't know when Masonry was created or formed or brought here. Since time immemorial, Masonry has been growing, and it came through the Western esoteric tradition and up through the Renaissance esotericism period into modern day. You have the Enlightenment and all that have had its influences on it. So by understanding the various Western esoteric traditions, you may better come to understand what Freemasonry is about. Now, the interesting thing about Freemasonry is that it's very diverse, and that's because it depends on interpretation and understanding. And what I mean by that is you have some Masonic obediences that just focus primarily on charity and dealing with all the wonderful things that come with charity. And so a lot of their meetings are business. They work on trying to organize fundraisers and breakfasts and dinners to help do whatever charitable action they're doing. You have some Masonic obediences that tend to be more in continental Europe, mainly in France, but they're all around, that focus more on civil reform and looking at the society of their country and seeing how they can improve it, which is always something that's near and dear to the heart of a Mason. Is how can we help everyone advance? And in some of those obediences, they look at more political sides of things. Universal Co-Masonry is a theosophical adogmatic masonry, shortened an esoteric masonry. And what we do in esoteric masonry is we look at the philosophic, intellectual, religious underpinnings of the philosophy of masonry. The brass tacks, the first principles, whatever it is that you want to call it, that really supports masonry. And again, tying it back into our understanding of the Western esoteric tradition, understanding the various traditions around Freemasonry through which Freemasonry came through, will help us understand the philosophy, the ritual, the experiences. We all have experiences in Masonry. Brother Benjamin, Brother Patrick, and myself have all been initiated. Our initiations, although the same, had very different impacts on us. And so having a stronger knowledge in these various traditions allows us to interpret our experience, to understand it in its entirety. My last comment before we jump into Neoplatonism is that I believe it was Wilmhurst said it, and I love quoting him. He's an excellent author and a visionary when it comes to Masonry. He said that we are often undergo our physical initiation, and very few undergo their spiritual initiation at the same time. And what that means, I've come to understand, is that sometimes we get initiated because we know that's the moment, but it's not till later that we understand what we've really undergone and what we really have chosen as a life path. And that's the mark of the spiritual initiation. Hopefully these seminars can help bring those closer together in time and space so that one day they align at the exact moment or near to each other. All right, so Neoplatonism. I have to say this was a really fun presentation to put together. They're all fun. I enjoy the research and the compilation of it. But everyone loves Plato in some form or fashion. And so looking at Plato and understanding Neoplatonism through the understanding of Freemasonry has been a great joy. So what we're going to do for the next hour plus is that we're going to look at, first off, Plato's metaphysical framework. We want to understand that because Neoplatonism is based off Plato's metaphysical discourse, such as, and this is found in books like the Timaeus, Republic, the Phaedrus, those type of things. So if you're looking at books to read, I always point you there. And then you can introduce maybe some Neoplatonist books that will better extrapolate how they're different. So we're going to look at just a little bit. We're not going to go in anything deep. We're going to do a cursory understanding of Plato's metaphysics. And then we're going to see how from Platonism we got Neoplatonism. So we're going to look at heavy hitters like Plotinus, Iamblichus, those type of individuals. And then we'll get into the tenets of Platonism, or excuse me, Neoplatonism. The tenets there's a lot, and I might skip a few in the sake of time, because the very last one, which is Gnosis, is something that I think we really should get to. So just so you know, if I have to jump a few, forgive me, I'm trying to get to that last one, because to me, that's the part where you can see Freemasonry the most. It's not Neoplatonism, it's Freemasonry's understanding put in the words of Neoplatonism. So that is how we're going to spend the next hour, 15 minutes. And I have my clock here, so that way, if I start losing track of time, I can get us back on schedule. All right. So the number one thing we need to understand about the Platonic metaphysical framework is two things. One, it has two realms, the realm of being and the realm of becoming. And then the other part is that it is incomplete. It's very fragmented. And that's where we will see a lot of growth into Neoplatonism, is where you have these spiritual, metaphysic, mystical philosophers like Plotinus coming in and just putting the pieces together, much like a mosaic, but with big spaces, and patching it together to create a very beautiful philosophic structure. So when we look at the realm of being and the realm of becoming, you have the realm of being. That is your realm of forms. Now, do not be deceived by the word forms, because in our modern mind, forms mean something solid and tangible, something that can be picked up with our five senses. So it's very empirical. In Plato's time, if you remember, scientists didn't have the name scientists, they were natural philosophers. Remember that philosophy is the father of science, because philosophy asks the questions, science tried to go find the answers to them. So when we look at Plato's time, he didn't have the same concept of forms as we do today. So for us, what he meant, or what we can interpret forms to mean, is ideals. So if forms kind of trips you up for a long time, I was like, it's just, you kind of have to unscrew the modern mind a little bit and rework it to kind of comprehend fully what he's saying about when he says forms. So substitute ideals if forms kind of throw you off. Now, the realm of being, of forms, these are all, in Jungian psychology, you would call archetypes. These are all the archetypes that you could ever think of. The highest is the good. That's the highest archetype, and or the highest form, and that's which all other forms are coming from. Okay? These forms are unchanging, so they're immutable. They are eternal, and they're perfect. Everything we see in materiality is a replication of a form. So let's take something mundane. Let's take a chair. This is how it was explained to me many years ago, and I always remembered it. There is, in the realm of forms, technically, and a form of the perfect chair, right? It's chair. And every chair that we replicate here in materiality is trying to take exactly that and replicate that idea, that ideal, and bring it into manifestation. Now, it will always be flawed, because matter cannot be perfect, right? And again, this is all through Neoplatonism. This is all our Platonic idealism. We're trying to understand it through their scope. So if we look at this, everything here is a replication. Even humans are replications of the ideal. And in Platonic philosophy, anything that ends with the word ness, N-E-S-S, is the act of trying to be. So let's take goodness. Goodness is the act of trying to be, so you're becoming good. It's an action. It's the verb. So when we look at the realm of being, that is all that is perfect and immutable. Now, in opposition is the realm of becoming, and that's materiality. And this, again, as I said, these are impersonations. So when we think of all the countries, last time I checked, what is there, 181 countries? That might have changed since the last time I looked, it's been a couple of years. But let's say 180 countries. 180 countries around the world. there's 180 interpretations and impersonations of the ideal justice. Some of them are really close to the mark, some of them are not. It just depends on how much you understand what justice is. So the act of being just or justness is going to be in the realm of materiality. And as the systems get better in countries across the world, that means they're coming more in line with the ideal of just. In science, we say it's becoming more accurate, right? Accurate meaning closer to the mark. And just like the realm of forms are immutable and eternal and without flaw, everything in matter, again, is constantly changing. It's fleeting, it's an illusion, it's temporary, it's flawed, right? So you have this introduction in Plato's metaphysics of duality. You have the highest, which is the realm of forms, and you have materiality. The interesting thing, if we look at epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, which if you ever have a chance, I highly recommend it. And I have to remember the name. It's a Wesleyan College. There is on YouTube, there's a wonderful series of lectures by a professor who talks a lot about Platonic idealism and the different philosophers in Greece and in ancient Greece. And he gives a wonderful example of the difference between knowledge and opinion. And maybe someday I'll do a presentation on that. Who knows? But I digress. So what I understand from watching his series multiple times, because it was a lot to grok, is that what we know as knowledge today, so again, all the information that we have collected empirically through our five senses, according to Plato, that's not knowledge. That's information, as we would say today, facts about matter. And that is our opinion. This is why science can, hopefully, if it keeps true to itself, change its mind, as we would say. As more information comes in on matter, the more updated the opinion will become of science. So when we look at what true knowledge was and is, according to Platonic metaphysics and philosophy, true knowledge is going to be knowledge of the forms. It is going to be, that's what he called epistemology, the knowledge of that realm, which all things are a replica of. So keep that in mind. It's a very humbling idea to think that everything I know is just an opinion, especially since we operate in a world where everything seems to be fact. Try that on for size. It gets you pretty humble pretty quick when you realize opinions. All right. So let me just move this over. So these are some more topics that are just about Plato's metaphysics. And the one thing I really want to point out, so I pointed these out, or I pulled these out rather, from all the different types of points we could have gone because they're the most interesting. They're the most interesting. They're the most relatable to what we're talking about. The soul, according to Plato, is an, I don't know if entity is the right word, but I'll use it anyways. An entity that has always existed before the inception of matter. And the one thing that I love, and I probably would say I'm a Platonist when it comes to this, is that the soul isn't learning when he's here. The soul, and I say he is just a neutral, the soul, he's learning to remember when he's here. So the idea of you're already imbued with the knowledge in the sense of Platonic knowledge, so that epistemology. You're already imbued with the truth. This whole existence, whether it's one or multiple, doesn't matter. They're all built for us to rediscover or uncover that which we already know. And just as a kind of a tangent on that, and brief, I think this is why we have a lot of, people have a lot of kind of supernatural type of interactions, whether, it's prescience or it's out-of-body experiences or some familiarity, such as like deja vu, those type of things, because we have known what we're coming to know now. We've already known. So that's that pre-existence of that epistemological understanding. We already know the forms. And oftentimes, I think when we talk about like the big existential questions of, well, is all human beings, are they good? Are they endowed with the inherent knowledge of goodness? I think that's a Platonic question. Are you asking if it's something that we already know, that realm of ideals, or is it something that we have to be taught, which means that we're not remembering, we are actually creating. Plato's moving to the step of ascension, Plato saw that how the soul travels and progresses, evolves, if you will, is that it's moving from that opinion of matter, that fact collection, the empirical experience of matter, to the genuine understanding of forms, understanding that which is pure and unchangeable. That's what his examples of in the books, Symposium and the Republic, you have the allegory of the cave and the ladder of love. If you are not familiar with the allegory of the cave, or you don't, like if someone said, hey, so-and-so, can you sit down and explain to me what the allegory of the cave is? And you can't do it, I highly recommend you check it out, because it's something that you hear a lot, not necessarily in Masonry, but in conversations with other brothers and other Masons. It will be a good foundation. And the ladder of love is something also less common, but is something that you should put your attention to. So what you saw, what Plato saw rather, is that soul is ascending from materiality into, so the realm of becoming, into being. And that was that soul's ascension. Again, moving from the dichotomous experience of matter and the perfect. Notice I didn't say the divine, because that will come in a little bit later. He believed in a demiurge that impressed itself upon the realm of matter and brings it into harmony. I cannot say I fully conceptualize what he saw as the divine mind. I understand more what the Neoplatonists saw as a divine mind. I am still trying to sort out the difference. So if you have that question, hold on to it. I don't have an answer yet. Plato saw as like explicitly the divine mind. Because if you notice, there has been no discussion about a creative force in all of this. And that's intentional, because Plato, in his metaphysical framework, didn't ascribe a source of something higher than the two forms, or two realms, rather. So this divine mind, whatever it may be, is taking the realm of forms and is putting it upon matter and forcing that matter, which is chaos, into order. And that's where you see that conflict in life, where things are trying to readjust themselves to be in harmony with the forms, but it's imperfect, so it struggles. So that's a little bit of the metaphysical layout. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions before we move on and jump into the actual tenets of Neoplatonism and the heavy hitters of that particular philosophy. So I'm going to stop share here and see if there's any questions whatsoever. And that includes you, Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin.
I have a question from Brother Mark.
Okay.
The question is, if good is the highest of forms, is bad then the absence of good or the lowest of forms?
Ooh, did everyone hear that okay? Okay, that's a great question. So according to Platonic idealism, and we'll actually see this when we talk about matter as evilness in one of the tenets of Neoplatonism. In our modern mind, we say there's good and there's evil, and one is in direct contrast to the other. In Platonic idealism, it is the absence of. So it's not that things are like inherently evil. It's that they lack the goodness, the act of being good in them. So it is an absence of, not an active defiance. That was how the difference would be. So there is no evil in the sense of an active realm of evil. It's just the absence of that form. Great question. Other questions? Man, my eyes are getting crap. Tyler, you have your hand raised?
Yes. Okay. The unmute was a little tricky there.
That's okay.
So I'm a little bit new on the Neoplatonistic side, but the term demiurge being used here, are we to define that or understand it in the same way that say the Gnostic Christians would, or is this more in the actual meaning of the word in Greek, as in just a creator of any kind?
It's more the creator of any kind. It's not the Gnostic demiurge. It's it's a craftsman. It's someone who is not the highest, but is assisting the highest in some way.
Duly
whether
noted.
it's by creating or whatnot. Yeah. So it's not the Gnostic, it's more the Greek.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Brother Patrick, are we good? All right. We will move forward. All right. So now we're going to move into the actual tenets of. So now that we have a little bit of a foundation on the metaphysical framework, we're going to look at just a couple names that are worth your study if you really feel like, I'd really like to know Neoplatonism a little bit better. You have individuals such as Plotinus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, and Proclus that have worked on the idea of Platonism and just streamlined it. So what they did, as I said earlier, is they took parts of it, and Plotinus is considered the father of Neoplatonism. He was in the late 3rd century AD. He was the one that said, you know what, I really like what Plato has done, but it lacks severely some things that really it needs to be there. So he starts it, and then you'll see like Iamblichus and Proclus come in and add stuff, and Porphyry. So these are the people that have come in. I did not go through and say, well, this is what Porphyry added, and this is what I figure that's a little bit too deep for our understanding because we're talking about Freemasonry and how this relates. So again, if you really want to check that out, you can look at that and get a better understanding of how each one of these had an individual contribution. But I wanted to mention them because I think they're important. All right. So here we go. What you see is ultimately what Plotinus did is he said, okay, I like Plato's metaphysical framework. However, the duality, the bifurcation in existence is incomplete. So he took the two realms and he imbued it with the one, with something higher than the realm of forms. And ultimately, he went from just the one and created multiplicity. So from unity to multiplicity. If you're a big Pythagorean fan, you can think of it as the tetratus. You have from the one, you have the many. And it created emanations, which we'll talk about here in a second, and a spiritual hierarchy in that emanation. And what this did was like pulled through all of Plato's metaphysical framework, a cohesiveness to it. Everything relates back to the one. So in Hermeticism, we saw it called all, but this is the one. And here, if you look, there's an example, or not an example, but it lays out the hierarchy. So you have the one, Nous, or the Nous, depending on how you want to say it, world soul, and then materiality. We're going to go through each one of these here in the next 4 or 5 slides. The realm of forms, he didn't get rid of them. He just put them in what he considered the rightful place. Now, Plotinus, what made Plotinus different than Plato was that Plotinus was a mystic, and he believed, and again, for those who are like, I'm not sure what that word means, mystic means that you can experience the highest directly, usually like through a static experience, ecstasy in a sense, like you're in a state of ecstasy in the religious sense of the word. And he saw that through Eastern tradition, spiritual experience and understanding a hierarchy, one could better get to the realm of forms and ultimately the one. So that's the biggest change or inclusion into Platonist philosophy. So again, this is what I was talking about, emanation. So emanation means it's like a ripple in a pond. If you throw a rock into a pond and you watch the ripples, they all come from a point. And as you get away from that epicenter, the circles get bigger and bigger. So imagine that as emanations, that when you throw a stone, that stone represents the highest principle, in this case, the one. And from it moves out, each layer represents a different level of the hierarchy. The furthest away, or the further away you go from that origin, the further away you are from the one. So in Neoplatonist philosophy, materiality is the lowest you could go. So although it is imbued with the one and what comes with that divinity, it has the least amount, because you got to think the closer you are to the one, the more saturated and concentrated it is. Now, this again moves us from a duality of forms and material or matter and creates a 4-level hierarchy, which there's more in there, but again, I streamlined it to make sure that I can kind of stay on topic and get a lot of information in there. So now what I'm going to do is explain with each slide how Freemasonry is comparable. I didn't go through how we're different. I just said how they're related. So in Neoplatonism, the one is ineffable and is beyond knowing or perception. Now, Freemasonry has the great architect of the universe. And that is the name we give to the highest. So you have the all, the one, you have the great architect. And in Masonry, you have that as the very first principle of all things. Now, again, that principle is going to be ineffable, incommunicable, and transcendent. And that's where all things come into being, right? The state of becoming. We all have that within us. Now, here's the thing. People will say, well, Masonry doesn't have dogma. I don't know if Brother Pike would agree when he named his book Morals and Dogma, which is, if you ever have a chance to read that, if you think you're going to read it and find out everything was Masonry, he doesn't just tell you what Masonry is. He writes around the various ideas in each degree. So good luck with that. But he talks a lot about the dogma that Masonry has. In order for a system of philosophy, whether it's a charitable, civil reform, or esoteric, it has to have some set of beliefs. Else, like, then how do you differentiate it from something else? And in Freemasonry, you have the belief in something higher. Now, in a lot of obediences that tend to be more Christian or Jewish, it has to be a personage, like an anthropomorphic individual. Universal Co-Masonry, it is a higher something. So if it is an anthropomorphic being, that is just as accepted as someone who's like, well, I believe it's a creative force, or however you describe it. If you think like, oh, I'm it and I'm the only thing and that's it, then Universal Co-Masonry is not for you. But when we look at it in contrast, or not in contrast, but in comparison to Neoplatonism, again, there's that incommunicableness. So if Brother Benjamin and Brother Patrick and I were sitting down and having a conversation about the great architect, we all agree that there is one. We're going to really have a great discussion on how different we see that great architect. We all have very different interpretations of that. And that's the beautiful thing, is that's diversity and unity coming together. We unite, even though we have very different opinions. And so Freemasonry has, again, with Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism, that shared belief in the highest. So here you have the Nous. Like I said, the realm of forms, or the realm of being, was not taken out of, I mean, that's a pretty big thing to take out of Plato's metaphysics. You would destroy his metaphysics if you did. It's kind of a center pin of it. What they did, the Neoplatonist philosophers, is they went back and they said, all right, we're going to put the realm of forms into the Nous. The Nous is the divine mind, and it contains all forms. Now, this is an interesting thing. So a little bit about the hierarchy of a lodge. So depending on the orders, the name of the master of the lodge is a little bit different. In Universal Co-Masonry, the head of the lodge is called the Rite Worshipful Master, right? And they're embodied of a particular principle. And then you have a first in command and a second command, and then there's a total of 15 officers. And they all are going to be very specific to what they're supposed to do. So in the lodge that Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin and I belong to, we each hold a different office, and we don't do the same thing as the other person. Each of us have our own special task, and we're kept to that. We don't ever bleed out into someone else's task. In fact, if I try to do Brother Patrick's job, or he tries to do Brother Benjamin's job, we're actually corrected and say, hey, that's not your place. So what does this have to do with Neoplatonism? An idea is that the officers of the lodge, they're not owned by a person. They're not owned by a person. The principle owns them. So my office is not owned by me. I embody a particular principle. That principle in Neoplatonist language is forms. I can't be anything but the form that I'm supposed to represent. So if I'm trying to be Patrick's form, Brother Patrick's form, or Brother Benjamin's form, like, I can't do it. Like, my job is to do my job. And so you can say that you have the emanation of the great architect pulling through the lodge, and it's going to interact with each officer as a form. And I have to say, this is a really beautiful delineation, because back when I was a little bit younger and a lot more ignorant, arrogant of my ignorance, I don't know, whichever it is, I would always you want to correct people because you know so much, and I really didn't know anything. But you want to help people and do their job. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that good only knows how to be good. Just only knows how to be just. And so you have to allow each member to fulfill the various principles. Ultimately, in Freemasonry, once you start, you're not an officer when you first get, when you first become a Mason. You have to learn what Masonry is before you can embody the principles of that office. So when you become a Master Mason, you hold an office, most likely. And ideally, you start from the office that's it's a hierarchy, right? It's a physical hierarchy, a replication of the spiritual hierarchy. You start at the bottom and you work your way through each of the offices. Every time you enter an office, you are trying to learn a particular form. You're trying to embody that form to the best of its ability. Yes, it's going to be flawed because we're using our perspectives and our language and our understanding, and that's always limited. But that's the beauty of it. Just like the divine mind of Plato, pressing on matter, the immutable experience of the forms, you're going to have that conflict. In universal Co-Masonry, we don't shy away from conflict. We don't create it. We try, not to, but we want to help. So when I was coming up through the offices, I always had my master, the lodge, my right worshipful master, tell me when I was doing things that I shouldn't be or how I could do them better. So you get very open to constructive criticism, like, hey, this was really good. However, you need to work on this, this, and this. And it allowed me to, I didn't embody all of them perfectly, but I did become aware of how each office represents a principle. So the officers of a lodge are the realm of forms. The lodge is going to be something else. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's not that the right worshipful master is the great architect, because the great architect holds its own place, but it's a conduit through which hopefully, you want good people in the East, that they're going to help emanate the light of the great architect through all the office. Ideally, the master of the lodge should have experience in all the offices so that that brother can assist the brothers coming through. As I say, we're stewards of the principles, and we want to make sure that when we pass that principle on, that we have done it fairness and justice. I'm going to do one more slide and we'll stop for questions and comments. So if you see the world soul, the world soul is kind of an interesting kind of a flux. It's kind of hard to put your finger on, but it's a bridge between the nous and materiality. So if you have the nous is going to represent the officers of the lodge, which is the divine. So the nous is divine intelligence, or the intellect. Excuse me. The world soul is going to be the lodge. The lodge is what holds all of that together. It's like the bringing together the microcosm and the macrocosm into one space. So when we are at work in Masonry, that's when we're in the lodge. When we go out into the world in our various capacities, we take our work with us, and hopefully we can impact the world around us in a positive way. Now, what that means is when I'm sitting in the office that I hold in my lodge, that I am taking the realm of forms within me, and I am working in the lodge, which is the world soul, so that when I go out into the world, that materiality, I can again infuse materiality with the principle I represent. The lodge is very, very important. So you often will hear two things, and this might be new for some Masons who haven't heard it, but I think it's an important distinction. So you have the lodge, and you'll hear us say the Masonic temple, Masonic lodge. We kind of use them interchangeable, but indeed they're not. The temple, the Masonic temple, is just the edifice by itself. What makes it a lodge is when you have the members inside of it. So when you bring the temple and the brothers together, or the members together, that's when you get a Masonic lodge. And if you look at bullet point 3, that's the soul body, which makes a lot of sense when you look at it with what the lodge represents. You have the temple, which is supposed to be the divine house of the great architect of the universe, or Neoplatonistic language, the one. And then you have the material, which is us, coming in and sitting down, and you have ultimately two entities, spirit and matter, trying to speak to each other. And so you need a place where it's a little bit easier. And that's the lodge, that's the world soul. It allows us to connect with that which seems almost unconnectable. Because in the realm of forms, like, describe to me, and I like this one, I use justice a lot because it's hardest. It's like, describe to me what justice is. Like, how do you do that? But if you're in a space where it's conducive more to that type of thinking, it allows you to come to your thoughts better. It allows you to gestate more on that idea so that you can better understand it. Again, and I might say this actually later. I think this is under the mystical slide, but I'll say it now. And we're going to stop here in 1 minute. Is that Plotinus, because he's the father of Neoplatonism, so if I mention him a lot, that's why. He really, really emphasized that in order to gain Gnosis, to experience that, you had to experience it on the inside. It was inner. It was something that was inner work. It wasn't necessarily, someone talking at it. Not that that didn't help, get you situated, but you ultimately have to find within yourself that whole experience. And again, we'll take something that's pretty familiar with everyone. It's like, you can bring a horse to the water, but you can't force the horse to drink. So Masonry gives you all the information to bring you to the water. But ultimately, you have to drink the water, right? You have to choose to put yourself into the elixirs of life and epistemological knowledge in order to really come to understand it. And so the lodge that's why we don't, at least in Universal Co-Masonry, we don't release where our lodges are. We don't tell people who are other Masons. We don't put addresses online. The lodge is a very private place. And this is the place where people can go and have that discussion with the great architect, and experience an evolution of consciousness because of it. And the lodge changes, it's almost like it changes dimension, if I can use that. It weakens the links in materiality and opens the spirit to receptivity. So with that being said, I am going to stop here and see if there's any questions or comments from anyone that would like to ask them. Brother Benjamin, Brother Patrick. All right. Silence reigns. Let us go ahead and continue on. I almost clicked on my emails, so you don't want to see my emails. All right. So we have the one, we have the Nous, which is, again, divine intellect, and then we have the world soul. Now, the next one we're all familiar with, because it's where we live, is materiality. And this goes to the question that was asked about goodness and evil. So when we look at good and evil, now, there are brothers that definitely think that there is good and evil, and they have a very black and white understanding of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That there is, maybe there's an adversarial force that makes us do evil and stuff like that. That is a completely accepted interpretation of Freemasonry, Universal Co-Masonry specifically. However, you'll see a lot of people either in the more Gnostic or Hermetic camp, a few of us in the Neoplatonist camp, which I probably am more on Neoplatonist than a Gnostic. So you saw that in Gnosticism, matter it's evil, like in the sense that we grok evil. It's like it's evil. And Hermeticists saw it as like, this is a place, it's a prison, but you can break out of it. So it's kind of like in that weird place where it's, it's not so great, but you can get out of it. And then, as I was saying earlier, Neoplatonists see that materiality is the absence of the good. So it's not that it's evil in a very maybe Christian sense or very religious sense as we understand it today. It's just the lack of something. And we're here to try to bring that back in, try to reconnect with that. So it's the absence of the highest. Now, I wouldn't say it's fully absent because it's an emanation of, but it's at its weakest, lowest, most dilute form. And in Masonry, you'll see that this is kind of a shared idea. So the soul falls into the lowest realm, which is matter, and it gets attached to matter. So when we look at all of our cravings and addictions we have, our bad choices that we make, it tends not to be the spirit or the soul, depending on how you define it. It tends to be the body saying, I want these things. And the soul is usually the one being like, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we shouldn't do that, it's the body that really wants us, that has that attachment, because the body's made of matter. So it's going to, like attracts like. So it's going to go towards that which it knows. And then you have the soul, that its language, its discussion, its experience is getting clouded by those attachments. And it confuses the soul. And this is where, Plato's like, we have forgotten. Well, it's materiality that has masked our understanding, that has clouded our interaction. And so we, again, an allusion to the allegory of the cave, when you're sitting in the cave, remember there's shadows on the cave wall, and there's people behind with fire, and they have puppets, and they're making shadows on the wall, and they're dancing. It's like the body wants you to believe those shadows are reality, when the spirit wants you to realize the realities behind you. And ultimately, Masons are really trying to understand how to get out of the cave and how to get to the actual knowledge of what is. So if the forms are behind us, the manifestations or the replications of the forms are in front of us, and then we're the ones that are, our bodies is trying to confuse us, and I don't think it's like this malevolent, like, oh, the body's trying to trick us, It's that the body is just seeing it through the lens of materiality, because that's what the body is. So that's what it can see it as. It's an ignorance, and it's not evilness. And like I said, I'm more of a Neoplatonist in that way. It's not that I don't believe in evil. I think, the absence of good can lead to terrible things. But ultimately, Masonry looks at eradicating ignorance. Ambition, fanaticism, ignorance are the tyrants of Masonry. Notice there's no word of like evil in it. And again, that's because there's not like, if you have the one or the great architect, there's a counter entity fighting against the great architect. Now, again, there may be Masons who interpret it differently, but on the whole, it's that we're moving from darkness to light. So we're trying to get out of the cave, we're trying to get up the side, and we're trying to go into the light. Find the sun. Again, I've said a million times, I'll say it again. Freemasonry is solar. It's all about the light. It is not a lunar experience. And so when we look at this, the uninitiated person is not evil. He is ignorant. Now, over my years, there have been people that have joined and they get really insulted because they're like, I'm a pretty smart person and I can't believe you think I'm ignorant. We're not saying you're stupid. No one said you're stupid. Ignorance is not stupidity. Stupidity is when you know you're ignorant, you don't fix it. That's my opinion. But when you look at that ignorance, you've never been a Mason. So yeah, you are ignorant to the world of Masonry. You don't understand it, and you don't understand it through the lens of Masonry, which makes you ignorant. And ultimately, the initiation is to help take off that ignorance, excuse me, and put it into understanding of the forms, to put it into that higher level of consciousness. And so again, it's not that people who are not Masons or have not been initiated are considered evil in any way. It's just that, again, moving from ignorance to understanding. I brought up Masonic Philosophical Society at the beginning, and one of its, correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Patrick, the motto is
Morte ad ignorantum, death to ignorance.
Death to ignorance. Don't make me repeat the Latin. Death to ignorance. And again, it's what we really hold dear here is, it's not so much about proving that I'm right in my belief, it's trying to understand how I've been ignorant in areas and how I can illuminate myself in listening to other people or reading other things, experiencing new things to help remove the darkness. To date myself, which I don't really care, how old I am, but back in the day when Zelda came out, if you remember that, for those who are video gamers of antiquity, if you remember, they have the map of Zelda, the original, and as the character moved on the map, like the map illuminated more. So it started out in darkness and then eventually move around to make the whole map manifest. I liken that to life. Like, we're moving around and there's a lot of areas that we're exceptional at, but there's a lot of areas that we're ignorant at. And we want initiation helps guide us through the darkness to get towards the light, which is the one in Neoplatonism. So I brought up mystical knowledge. Check time here. Okay, brought up mystical knowledge. This one's really interesting because mystical knowledge in this understanding of Neoplatonism is like what I said earlier. It's that it's all inward and upward. You have to work inside of yourself. Now, this is a trap if you're not careful. A lot of people join Masonry for self-improvement. There's nothing wrong in that, initial impulse. initial reason to join. It is not the end of the road. However, if you spend your entire life improving yourself, like as your sole focus, I think you've missed the whole point, not only of Masonry, but of life. Now, when we look at inner work, hopefully we're all doing inner work, that introspection, that, you know, dissecting ourselves and trying to see where, again, that ignorance is. And in Gnosticism, excuse me, in Neoplatonism, you get Gnosis, that becoming one with the one, you get that Gnosis through inner experience. That's that mystical experience. It's something that cannot be taught. Now, Freemasonry is interesting because Freemasonry uses transmission. Transmission means from mouth to ear and ear, you know, to mouth, back and forth between a master and an apprentice. So back in the day, not everything was written down, and so you had to rely on oral traditions, which were highly accurate, despite popular belief, to understand the various symbols. We have since, you know, over time had to write things down for whatever our reasons were, but this transmission, although it could not give us mystical knowledge, like it cannot be the intermediary between you and the divine, it lays the foundation for you to understand and interpret your experience. When you have those experiences, which we all have them, where you're just like, I don't know what to do with that, whether it was a dream or like, I don't know, some weird experience, you're just like, that was beyond understanding. Freemasonry provides you with an arsenal of tools. And what I mean by that is it gives you all sorts of allegory to help you relate to and understand process of the ascension of the soul. It gives you ritual to help you practice. Ritual, you know, I grew up in a religious tradition that had a lot of ritual, but that wasn't until you're much older in life. So as you know, from 0 to 18, really didn't have ritual. So it was kind of like this foreign thing that, you know, that church over there did. And it was kind of vilified in some ways. And I always was like, well, why ritual? And I have come to understand the flaw of my lack of understanding, if you will, that ritual is not a habit, but it is something that you repeatedly do with the inclusion of the divine. And it allows you to purify the inside of you so that those mystical knowledge, that mystical experience can be better understood. And the arsenal that Masonry provides for you is symbols, provides ritual, it provides community, and it provides discussion. And you will have so many crazy, amazing, just perplexing, vexing discussions at any given point, because again, it's not like my goal to challenge you. My goal is just to have a conversation with you. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to understand, as I like to say. But we all get challenged, and it's sometimes very uncomfortable. I often find it very exhilarating because I'm like, wow, I never even considered that. And Masonry allows us to do that so that when we have those supernatural experiences, those psychic experiences, and when I say psychic, I don't mean New Age, I mean in the literal sense, you know, accessing the soul, if you will. When we have those moments, we can sit with ourselves and we can try to understand what the universe is trying to tell us. We all have dharma, in my opinion. We all have a purpose in this world and this existence, and we need to find it and we need to execute it to our best of our abilities. And if we harmonize ourselves, you know, according to, you know, think of Pythagoras's harmony of the cosmos, of the planets. If we can harmonize, if we can find that cosmic symphony that's playing all the time, if we just tune our radio the right way, we can hear it and we can process it and we can become a part of it, an active part. We're all a part of it, an active component of that grand symphony, that cosmic symphony. And mystical knowledge and Freemasonry is ultimately trying to do that. That is why I would caution you if you're like, I don't know if universal Freemasonry is for me. If you go out and you find another obedience and they want to initiate you online, I would really be careful, because initiation should be done in person and by yourself. Like, you should be able to go through it with you or another person physically. Because if you can get your body to go through the process of initiation, your consciousness will go with it. It will go along for the journey. And as I said earlier, you may have that spiritual initiation simultaneously, or you may come to understand it through your work as a Mason to really understand what you went through so that you can have that spiritual initiation later. Freemasonry really jives with that Neoplatonistic ideal of, it's not something I can teach you. It's not something I was taught. We are just given the tools to use. So it's not, again, and when I talk on symbolism in the past, like it's very important that we don't just hijack symbols and say that it is whatever you want it to be. A symbol is a symbol. You can have a feeling about what you think about. I like it. I don't like it. I always take the classic swastika. Modern times, everyone hates it because it represents a certain party back in the 1930s, 1940s. But, it predates that era by thousands of years. It's a very ancient symbol, and, it has a context to it. So Masonry allows you to strip down and say, okay, what does the swastika mean? Or what is the 5-pointed star or the circle or the triangle, whatever it is, and get you to understand what it meant in its context, in its historical relation and its spiritual connotation, so that when you come into contact with that, you can better understand that experience. Again, I think the Pythagorean idea of the harmony of the planets, the music of the planets, is probably the best way to put it. Because each planet represents something, as we'll talk about in astrology, and it's Western astrology for those who are into astrology. Not going to talk about Vedic or anything like that in the future. But if you look at astrology, each planet represents something. And so ultimately, we have to understand what it represents in order for us to discuss it and to understand. All right. Before I get to Gnosis, this is a really small font. I apologize. I'm going to stop here and just see if there's any questions, comments. I would really like to hear some people speak up, just because I've been talking for a while. I'm sure you guys are wanting a break. So if there are any comments or questions before we get to the Gnosis, I'd love to take them. Let's start with Brother Patrick.
So we have a question from the YouTube chat here. Jeremiah Waterchild asked, do you teach the second birth or the baptism of fire?
No, I don't. I honestly, I don't even know the reference. Maybe it's because I lack an understanding, but no, I don't. Sorry, Jeremiah. Other questions while we have you, Brother Patrick? We good?
I believe that's it. That's all for now.
Okay. All right, let's go to Zoom and let's talk to Billy. Welcome, Billy. It's good to see you.
Hello. Love this. Love Neoplatonism. I'm just curious if you have any personal opinions for where you think we came from and how we fell into this. That seems to be a common thread throughout Gnosticism and Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, and I'm just curious if you have any speculations. I know that's kind of a mind exercise, but just curious.
Oh, Billy, you should come to Colorado here and sit down and have some coffee with me, because it will be a long night for me to answer that. Some of it I will reserve just because it sounds a little crazy, and I don't know if I want to put that out there without being able to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
But I would say humans, I've had this discussion for many years with brothers along the way who unfortunately don't really, I don't know, I'm ecstatic about humanity. I think humanity's awesome. Yeah, we suck in some areas, and I'll own it. Like, we can definitely improve, but I'm really optimistic. I do not think humanity's dirt, nor should we get rid of ourselves. I think that's a terrible idea. It has very permanent effect. And so I think we're exceptional. And I have done some presentations in the past for some other platform where we talked about the uniqueness. It was an MPS presentation many years ago now that I think about it, about what makes humanity unique. And there were 5 traits. I'm not going to go into them here, but there were 5 traits that are unique to you. And they're so unique that it makes me wonder if we are from here. Yeah, we have some similarities, but it's like, man, the divinity, not that I don't think everything is imbued with the divine, because I do, but there's something that just makes us so extraordinary that makes me wonder where we came from. If we came from here, I have a lot of questions. If we, were, seeded from extraterrestrial life, I don't know. I also have a lot of questions. I'm not quite sure the answer. Why we fell. So there's a popular idea that along some of our members that I don't agree with, not because I think they're wrong. I just think I know more. If you can tell, I love to debate. So if you take a side, I always tend to take the opposite side. So forgive me for that flaw. But the idea is that, the brothers that believe in reincarnation, that the reason why we reincarnate is because it is the divine or the great architect trying to experience matter in all its forms. And I don't know if that's really the case, because, the divine is so vast. But But there's something that the soul needs, whatever the soul is. There's something that the soul needs, that it fell from the source in order to get it. Because I think when you look at it, and we'll talk about this at the end of Gnosis, but if you know, the original sin, the fall of man, however you want to word it, that falling from the source into matter, and then that return, the ascension of the soul that fell is not the soul that's returning. It's not the same. There's something that matter does, and I'd love to just sit with this. Maybe I should go sit in the lodge and try to, you know, parse it out. But there's something that the soul changes with when it's in matter. There's something that it gets that it didn't have before. You know, if you look at the Christian version of the tree of good and evil and the tree of knowledge, the two different trees that are there, did the soul need to know? Let's put this in Neoplatonic sense or Platonic idealism. Did the soul need to forget in order to truly understand? Because like once you learn something, you can never unlearn it. Like you can never undo it. Like again, it's like that, you know, trying to put the toothpaste back in the bottle. Once it's been out, you really can't do it. So why the soul fell, I don't have the specifics, Billy, but what I believe is that there's something that matter gives us. I don't know if it's perspective. I don't know if it's recollection. I don't know what the word is, but it gives the soul something. And that soul needs it in order to return back to the divine. And the divine wants us to have that in some way, whether it's, you know, like my brothers think, where, you know, the divine needs information, or in my sense, there's something that we as the sparks, if you want to go to Hermeticism, we as the sparks of divinity are trying to bring back together. But there's something here in materiality that we need. And so the fall was important. Now, there's a book, I mentioned it last time. It's my favorite historian, Francis Yates, on Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic tradition. I'm still working through it. If you ever read Yates, it's always a labor of love, but I enjoy it. She brings up the idea of how, it's not her, but in Hermeticism, that when the soul ascends, there is vices that it has to shake off, and in its place virtues come in. So there's 12 punishments and there's 7 vices. The 12 punishments can be related to the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the 7 vices she's not necessarily laid out. I'm trying to understand if it's the 7 what are they called? Seven deadly sins. I was going to say 7 cardinal, that's the wrong direction. 7 deadly sins, thank you. But add to, oh, see, I was just channeling cardinal sins. So I think that the soul, as it ascends through kind of like the Hermetic idea, is that we're learning through different vices, and that eventually we'll get to the top. So in that process of learning, do we actually come to truly understand and comprehend those vices, or excuse me, those virtues? And that's what allows us to return. Maybe that's the key. A lot of speculation in that, Billy, but I do think that there's something in there. For those who are really big into astrology, looking at the 12 punishments and the 12 powers, which are like virtues and vices, would be really interesting to correlate the different vices that go with the different planets, or excuse me, the different zodiacal signs. And then the 7 vices and virtues that allow you to ascend are the 7 classical planets of geocentric model. So there's a lot there to unpack. And like I said, Billy, we could go forever, but in the interest of other people's questions and comments, I need to move forward. Tyler, your hand is raised.
It is. Yeah. So you mentioned, I want to try to tie all 3 topics together, because that was a really good question, in my opinion. You brought up the Legend of Zelda, and I'm a game designer by trade. So the term you were looking for, I think, is a fog of war, in that you start with a limited view of your map, and then as you play through the game and you learn new skills and you travel to new areas, you get a broader and broader view of the world. This sort of ties into the concept of illumination, because that idea that is presented in the Legend of Zelda and in pretty much all role-playing games actually, goes back to Dungeons and Dragons, and those guys were reading, Golden Dawn and Crowley and Rosicrucians and putting that into their game. But the idea that they're trying to sort of portray is just like in life. You sort of take a moment out of your time to go play in this world. You could say play, call it a game, but to live a life that has limited parameters that you don't have in your real life. And maybe you have the ability to do things in that world that you can't do in this world. So there's this concept. Some people nowadays are kind of going full conspiracy theory with like we live in a simulation, but from the perspective of the soul, you could posit that whatever the next rung above us is living through our avatar with our limitations and doing that as a crucible, as a way of growing and having the same experience that you have when you play a game or read a book or live in the shoes of something else that you don't. That's what that brought to mind to me. So it's more of a comment than anything else.
I was having a great conversation with myself. I hope you can read lips. I apologize. I'll try that. Yes, the fog of war. That is exactly the term I was looking for. I was talking to apparently just Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin, but what I was saying was that Brian Greene, he's a physicist. He wrote a book called The Elegant Universe. I read many years ago, and he talks about the different multiverse theories that are out there. And one of them he talks about is the simulation and the holographic universe and all that. And again, it's interesting because it's like, are we in a simulation? And you got to be careful because you can get stuck in that mindset for a long time, and it could be very not productive, unproductive. However, it's an interesting experience to put yourself in and give yourself a different perspective. Because how do you prove that we're not? It's really hard to prove it negative. So thank you very much for sharing that, Zach, because I had forgotten that particular theory of the simulation. We're going to move forward. Nazar, I haven't seen you in a hot minute. It's good to see you, Nazar. What do you have for us?
Yes, question. Thanks. Great lecture. Yeah, my question is that since Neoplatonism divide people into two, initiated and uninitiated, and what does Freemason take about democracy? Because democracy believes in the majoritarianism, and do you, as we know that Plato is not a friend of democracy. So how would you, are you saying that, can I say that the Freemasonry does not have a political significance? It believes in secularism. It separates politics from spirituality, or Plato does not separate spirituality, metaphysics from politics. And what is your stance? Yeah.
You know, Nazar, I would invite you to join me and Billy here in Colorado. I know it's a quick flight for you. You all can come over and we're going to have a long conversation at our guest house there. We can just, you know, night and
I have to take a holiday today from my work just to attend this lecture. You know,
it would be worth it, Nazar. It would be worth it. Keep that in mind. All right, so that's a great question, and it's a totally different presentation. And frankly, Brother Matthias, for those who are familiar with Brother Matthias, he is far better equipped at political theory than I am, and he does an excellent presentation. I always try to get him to come on to the seminar, but he feigns busy. But he does an excellent presentation on political science and Freemasonry. And Freemasonry does divide between initiated and uninitiated. There is the distinct difference. Like, people are like, oh, you know, Masonry, they only help their brothers. That might be true in some other obediences. But in Universal Co-Masonry, it's not that we help just the brothers. We'll help anyone that asks. But I have a higher standard for my brothers because we play by the same rules. We have a code of conduct that all of us agree on when you become initiated. So, you know, if a brother who's obviously initiated missteps in that conduct, it's a greater disappointment than someone who's uninitiated because they're not playing with the same rules. And so there's a lot of width and space given around them to make those, as we see, mistakes. So we do actually differentiate between initiated and uninitiated. Democracy, that's a good one. The ancient and ancient accepted universal rite, which is the series of degrees that we perform here at Universal Co-Masonry. So first degree all the way up to the 33rd, including some of the English rites, such as the Mark, the Royal Ark Mariner, and the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem. You will see all sorts of different styles of governance, depending on the status of the lodge, whether it's consecrated or whether it's under dispensation. Consecrated lodges have more democracy. You'll see that under dispensation is more of a monarchy. You have the Supreme Council, which is an oligarchy. You have various forms of political systems. And weirdly enough, it all works. We have a constitution, so you can maybe even say we're a constitutional republic on one level. It just depends where we're at and what perspective we're looking at. So there is democracy, but it's not like throughout the entire system. One political theory does not work by itself, contrary to a lot of belief. You need a lot of different political theories in there working simultaneously to make it work. So again, jump on over. I know it's like a 5-day flight for you, but you can come on over, Nazar, and we'll have coffee, and me and Billy can talk about all sorts of good stuff. But that's just the basics of it. Maybe I can beg and plead Brother Matthias to come and present that political theory. It's been like 2 or 3 years since he's done it, and it's exceptional what he presents. Brother Benjamin?
Can you repeat the name of the book about the 12 punishments and 7 deadly sins?
It's Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition by Frances Yates. She also wrote The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, which was one of the pivotal books in my life, which I didn't realize it at the time, that has really altered my understanding of Freemasonry in the Renaissance and Enlightenment period. I didn't agree with her assessment on Freemasonry. Again, there's that contrarian nature, because I was like, she's not a Mason, she doesn't know, so give her some space. But it allowed me to understand the backdrop and landscape of which Freemasonry, as it moves out of the Western esoteric tradition through the guilds of, the building guilds of the Middle Ages, and through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment up into modernity. So it gave a good linear run for me. All right, we have 3 more hands, and then, all right. Edward, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'd like to make it short, actually, and then probably change a little bit of topic. When you mentioned the cave and the Republic of Plato, the allegory in there is pretty simple, actually. We're facing a wall where it's dark, and then the light is in the back, and then we see just the shadows passing by, and that's what we understand of reality, something like that. My question is kind of like simple. Does Masonic rituals and Masonic teaching help us just to turn around a little bit?
Can you ask that question again? Cut out for me.
Does the Masonic rituals and teaching help us turn around a little bit and not to face the wall anymore, but try to face the enter of the cave where the fire and the real things that we can see in reality?
Great question. So Edward, I would say that Freemasonry, what it does is it tries to get you to decipher the real from the unreal. Now, what I mean by that, and keep that in mind, because Masonry actually flips the usage of real and unreal. In Platonic philosophy, the real is the tangible, what you see, and the unreal is that which is like the ideal, the ideals and the forms. In Masonry, the unreal is this world, this experience, and the real is the that which is beyond. So I'm going to use it in the Masonic sense. Masonry tries to get you to go from the illusion, the unreal, to the real. Now you have to turn around. It's not going to force you. Like, it's not going to take you hostage and force you to make a choice. It's going to equip you with enough information and enough experience and understanding that you are like, maybe there's something behind me. Like, why do I feel the impulse to turn around? And it will help you lead yourself out. Is Freemasonry salvific? Is it about salvation? It's not that there's the classic idea, like the Christian idea at least, of salvation, where someone has died and is, saving our sins. Not that there aren't brothers who don't think that, because there definitely is. Masonry is salvific in the sense that it says that in order to get your soul to ascend, in order to bring it out of materiality, you need to do these things. You need to work on your passions, those emotions that make you suffer so profoundly. And it needs you to help you understand your vices so that you can transmute them into virtues. And that will help you turn around and get out of the cave and look for the light. That's the process of salvation in Masonry. But there isn't like an idea of like, well, someone died for you, or whatever other religious tradition is out there. That's what Masonry tries to do. Jason. Okay. I'm looking at my chats while Brother Benjamin is unmuting you, and everyone's telling me I'm unmuted.
Yeah, I'm
There
sorry.
you are.
Yeah,
Jason.
I think, because you were talking earlier about black. I'm a black and white, hot or cold type of guy, and this whole idea of I forget the question, but we're gonna have to go to Colorado and have coffee and to get to where we all came from, because I was brought up, this is where you came from, and this and that, but I have to be open-minded about all of this. And then you kind of answered it. The last guy asked a good question about if we could turn around and stuff. So my hand's been up forever. I forgot that it was. So you kind of answered the question just talking. So I'm good.
Hey, good. I'm glad we're on the same Wi-Fi, and that I was able to answer your question. I will say that I'm a moralist. Like in my intrinsic being, I'm a moralist. Me and Benjamin here, we're cousins, as we like to say. The real is not defined in Masonry. It's not like it's this or it's that. So for someone like ourselves that tend to be more black and white, this is because I was also brought up like this is where we came from. You in Masonry can come to understand that the real means whatever your religious tradition has taught you. It's not that it excludes it and says, no, that's not heaven, or that's not, whatever. The whole point of Masonry is to just make us not be ignorant of spirituality, of our divine heritage. It's to help us understand that this isn't it, that there's more to it. And I really like the Neoplatonist view of that materiality confuses the soul. And it makes it want to stay steeped in matter. But ultimately, we're trying to get out of materiality and get back to the realm of forms and be a part of that process. And that is an excellent segue to Gnosis. And I need to hurry because I'm almost out of time. But I loved the comments and questions shared by everyone. All right. Yeah, okay. Sorry, the font is really small. I apologize. But I'm just going to put it up there in case we don't get to it all. Except for the Masonry part, you don't get to see that yet. All right, so Gnosis it doesn't translate perfectly, but it means unity. Unity with the highest, if you are the one in Neoplatonism. They both had to do with the evolution of the soul. And when I say evolution, I'm talking about the ascension out of matter back into the great architect or the one. And the Neoplatonists came, this again, Plato never had this in his metaphysical framework, but they said there's these 3 steps that you need. And you're like, oh, 3 steps? That sounds easy. Obviously, it's not. You have purification, you have contemplation, and then you have union or static union. And when we look at purification, this is where alchemy sits, not in Neoplatonism, but just in a general sense of understanding ascension. Alchemy is not circular. It's a winding staircase, right? So although you may be in the same, what feels like the same location, you're not in the same point of space and time that you were when you started out. Like you're elevating yourself up, right? So purification, every step you take along the way, calcination, dissolution, separation, coagulation, whatever, that's the process of purification. Freemasonry is very interested in purification, looking at our shadow in Jungian terms and finding a way to integrate it. I wouldn't say that Masonry is so much. There's some brothers that believe more of a Freudian perspective that like you got to kill out the ego and get rid of that shadow. And again, there's space for that, obviously, in all places, just like there's space for my opinion as well. It's that purification. We're focusing on trying to smooth ourselves out. There's a lot of us that are a lot of our personalities that are discordant, and Masonry is trying to harmonize it not to some materialistic plan, but to the divine order of the cosmos, whether that's God or the one or the great architect, creative principle, whatever. It's trying to smooth us out. And that is, the more we smooth out and become more harmonious with the cosmos, the less the soul is confused with material attachment, because the material attachment starts to weaken and then eventually lessen and then be gone. And that's purification. And the next step is contemplation. But this is, again, and I like this, this is inward and upward. It's probably the best way to phrase this out. Inward and upward. I have 5 minutes. Okay. Inward and upward. Inward, again, is that mystical knowledge. You're looking inward. You're contemplating the forms. You're contemplating your mystical experiences. You're taking all that knowledge that you've learned of the world, and you're trying to put it in a cosmic understanding. And then you, in order to get that cosmic understanding, not only do you look inward, you look upward. Outside of his politics, because I don't really care about his politics at all, but Jordan Peterson, when he talks about his psychological review of the Bible, it's a fascinating, I think it's 14 episodes. Again, it has nothing to do with his politics. Back in the day, I think it's really, steeped into what he does best, which is talk about philosophy. He talks about how if you look at all these different like fairy tales and folk stories and stuff like that, they always had a star in it. Pinocchio has a star, who wished upon a star? Was that Pinocchio or is that someone else? I don't know. I'm getting old, I forget. But there's the star, and that star is where we're always looking up, and that star is fixed for our perspective. And that star is what's guiding us through the torrential waters and the waves and the storms and the chaos. And Neoplatonists believe that in order to purify, to ascend up, you got to know where you're ascending. So this picture here, that's the North Star, that's the one, that's the great architect. And if we're contemplating inward and we're looking upward, you can't go wrong. And Freemasonry, I guess you could go wrong. You can throw yourself on the left-hand path. But in Freemasonry, again, those tools are there to help guide you up that ascending staircase, that winding staircase. We don't use the word purification or contemplation. Union, this one's interesting because there's not a dogma in Masonry that says this is what union means. So we don't necessarily share that ecstatic union that the Neoplatonists have, though we do believe in the union. The one thing that the Neoplatonists believed in is that when the soul has done that purification, has contemplated inward, has looked upward, that eventually it can bring itself and dissolve into the one. It doesn't return. It's not a separate entity becoming a part of a bigger entity. It dissolves. There's no boundaries. There's no demarcation between myself and it. It's a dissolution. And in Freemasonry, you're going to find a whole bunch of different interpretations on what unity is. And in Neoplatonism, that's the final step. So I'm going to end with how this relates to Masonry. And I'm just going to use the Blue Lodge. Blue Lodge, Masonry, we like to categorize things by color. The Blue Lodge is craft Masonry or symbolic Masonry, first 3 degrees. The Blue Lodge, you can see that each degree, the first, the second, and the 3rd degree, correlates to purification, contemplation, and ecstatic union. In the first degree, we're looking at trying to define our deficiencies, right? Because we've got to define it in order to take care of it, whether we integrate it or get rid of it, depending on your perspective. It's up to the brother. And then we want to transmute all of those deficiencies into virtues. The one thing, if I could be so bold and say that I take issue with alchemy, is that, when you take lead to gold, you're literally changing the entity as it is. Like, lead and gold are 2 different substances. They have different number of protons, obviously making 2 different things. They have different chemical reactions, physical, experiences. They're very different. And to me, it's like, no, like I like the idea that Masonry uses. They use stone. Like you're given a stone, that's you. And that stone can either be smooth or rough. But the stone doesn't become, metal. It stays stone. And so my issue with alchemy is that you have to give up completely what you are to be something else. I don't know if that's true. Maybe when I'm older and wiser, I might disagree with myself now. I don't know. We'll find out. But when we look at transmutation, we're taking our deficiencies. We're not getting rid of them. We're bringing them into their virtue. If we look at cowardice, that's the absence of courage. So we want to imbue ourselves with courage to make that possible. In the second degree, again, that's a contemplation. Freemasonry is going to lay knowledge that allows you, as I've been saying, to really process what's going on. I don't know. I was young when I joined Masonry, but I remember sitting there being like, what is this is going on? This is so different. Like, if I didn't have the assistance along the way, the expert brothers that were assigned to my education, I don't know if I would have made it, because I had such an immature mind of just comprehending something bigger than myself. And so through their guidance, they allowed me to see these tools and provide their expressions and their context. And I was able to sort out this experience to the point now where it's home. When I go into a lodge, I'm very comfortable. I'm like, it makes sense to me. And so that second degree is really that contemplation. Look inward, look upward. What does inward mean? What are you finding? What is upward? Where is that taking you? Asking you all those great questions that you just struggle to answer. And maybe you don't answer by the time you die, but you have a better understanding of what it means to you. And that third degree is more of the unity of the great architect. We've got to figure out as Masons what it means to go back to the source. You know, that ascension from the descension. Are we returning? Are we dissolving? Is it going to be something else that defines it? But that's really important. A contemporary, or not a contemporary, was a student of Carl Jung, Ernest Becker, wrote a book, The Denial of Death. It's a dry read, but it's a good read. And he talks about how all cultures, doesn't matter where in time and space, all cultures of humanity is all centered around death. It's a very interesting premise, because everything we do, in his opinion, is in response to the fear of death. And I think what Neoplatonism and Masonry is trying to teach us is that, like, union with the great architect is not a bad thing. We need to meet it with grace. I don't know if I put it on here. I didn't. I had the AI, because messing around with that over the last couple months. AI did a really good rendition. Should have put it on here, of the Weeping Virgin, which is a Masonic illustration of the Weeping Virgin, a half broken, or a column broken in half, and death behind her with a scythe. And at first that image is very grotesque in the sense that it just strikes your senses as like mortality. But Masonry teaches you how to meet mortality with such grace and dignity that, as we like to say, you live a life worthy of remembrance and you die regretted. And that's ultimately allowing us to understand the soul's ascension. To become one with the unity, we have to leave materiality. So there's a lot, and that's just at the first 3 degrees. I didn't cover the whole ancient and accepted universal rite where we have all the other degrees. But you can look at that being a microcosm, and I'm running over, I'm sorry, that being a microcosm, and the whole ancient and accepted universal rite being the macrocosm of that soul's ascension, and trying to get us from materiality, work back through emanations into the source. And that's that. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming out, whether you were on the various platforms online or there with Zoom. I appreciate it. And for those who came around the world to join us, I also want to thank Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin for their assistance each month with the Masonic Seminar Series. As I said, next month we'll be doing astrology and Western esoteric astrology. It's actually pretty interesting, especially if you're like, man, I'm not into horoscopes. I would invite you to come back and check us out, because astrology is a huge piece, a part of this whole puzzle that often gets overlooked because of just how stained it has become in modernity. And I would challenge you to give it a chance to see what it was like in the context back in pre-Hellenistic, Hellenistic times. So thank you everyone for coming out. And for those people that are coming internationally, we'll be sending this out on a recording, so that way you can also be a part of the learning process that we're all going through. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful